This is actually the second time I'm recording this. Holy crap. What is good, YouTube? It's that one camera guy back at again with another video. In this episode, I'm going to go through the Sony a6000 user guide menu. Now, the way I'm going to set it up is based on how I would set it up. So I spend some time kind of thinking and fine-tuning the custom settings and all that stuff. I'm not going to dive into it too deeply. I'm just going to give you a general idea, and I'll probably cover the rest of it in a different video to kind of go into more specifics about it. But this tutorial I think would be okay for a beginner. It's probably best for an intermediate to advanced user, but if you're a beginner and you wanted to see all this stuff, go right ahead. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and reset the entire camera, but I'm going to go ahead and move my mode dial to the letter M on the top of the camera. That's usually how I start. And then once we're there, we're going to go ahead and press the menu button on our camera, and we're going to see the menu choices. And there's going to be 6 tabs on the top. If you see it, you're going to see a camera, a gear, Wi-Fi, app, and then a playback button and a setup icon. Those are the 6 different tabs, and in those tabs there's pages. So for example, tab 1, page 1 through 7. So what we're going to do is going to go to the last one, and we're going to go ahead and press down and navigate to page 6, go to setting reset, and choose initialize, and then click OK. And click OK again. This is going to reset and reboot the camera to its original settings when you first bought it. So if you just want to reboot the camera and start from the beginning with me, you can. You don't have to. You can just kind of modify as we go. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and enter all the stuff. Actually, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just going to click cancel. You can go ahead and enter that information if you'd like to. So I'm going to dive right into this. And it's kind of confusing at first, and it was confusing to me, but we're gonna figure this out together, okay? That's what we're doing. So let's go ahead and press menu. And the first thing we're gonna see is some options here. Really quickly, if you see an icon that shows a little mountain on it, that only affects pictures in your projects or whatever you're doing. So for example, I'm gonna go quickly through it. Image size has to do with the megapixels. Obviously, the bigger the number, the bigger the file, the better the quality. So obviously pick a bigger number based on what you want to do. You might want to choose 6 if you're just going to take pictures for eBay or something like that. That's an example. Aspect ratio, leave it at 3:2. People know they're going to use 16:9, but 3:2 gives you the most out of your sensor. All right, quality, this depends on you. If you want to shoot raw, shoot raw. That's going to let you edit the photo in something like Lightroom or Photoshop. Shoot in fine if you just want JPEGs and you're okay with that, or raw in JPEG. You don't always have to shoot raw. All right, moving on, we have panorama size and direction. To access this menu, I'm going to move my mode down to the panorama option, and you're going to get access to that. You just follow the instructions. I'm not going to cover in this video, but if I press menu, I now have access to panorama. So that's how that works. Now let's go ahead and jump back to the M option on our camera, on our mode dial, and then I'm going to press menu again. And now we have file format. This has a little film strip icon. This has only to do with video. So if you ever see that icon, it's for video. So the first thing we're gonna do is not use AVC HD, we're gonna use XAVC-S. That's the one I want you to use. Now you can play around with the other ones if you want, but to get the most quality, the best codec, use XAVC-S. Now it might ask you for a specific memory card. I have the one posted in the description below for the ones that I use. So if you want to find that out, check the comments below or the description below. Next, now we are on page 2, record settings. Again, film strip. Now yours might look different if you got your camera in an environment that is PAL. So in Europe, for example, you might see 25 and 50. In my case, I see 24, 30, and 60 for North American users. So for me, I would use 24 for film, 30 for regular video, and 60 if I wanted slow motion. For my PAL people out there, use 25 for film and 50 if you want some slow motion. Drive mode is something you change based on a given scenario. So I'm not going to really cover this in too much detail, but just know that this allows you to change how many frames per second you take and also your bracketing settings. Flash mode, you can go ahead and play around with this. I don't really use it too often, but fill flash is where you want to start with. Flash compensation is huge. It's really important. It can really come in handy. The flash comes up. You can actually point it up to a ceiling. The way I would use it, I would access this menu. If I needed to add more light and power into the flash, I would increase the flash exposure compensation or decrease it based on what I needed it for. So don't forget, you can definitely point the light up, use it to illuminate the room better, get more lighting, and improve your shots. So that's how I would look at it. Red eye reduction, you know when you take the flash, you point the flash directly at the person and the eyes turn red? That's what you're gonna do. You can turn it on or turn it off when you use the flash. Focus mode, again, gives you several options. We have single servo if you're used to kind of Canon or Nikon, and you got continuous servo right here, with continuous AF. Automatic AF, obviously, I would avoid that one. You have DMF, that's new. DMF stands for direct to manual focusing. So how it works is, you leave that on, you autofocus, let's say with your shutter button, and then you manually focus the lens to override the autofocus. This is really great if you want to kind of fine tune the focus point. And obviously, last but not least, manual focusing. Maybe you're doing video, or maybe you're manually focusing for some macro shots and you want to have that setting on. Moving on to page 3, focus area. This is kind of important. Let me just jump here. If you're coming from a DSLR camera, let me show you. Go down, sorry, wide obviously covers a wide area. Zone covers sections on the screen. Center is really centralized into the middle. And finally, this one's the one you want to know about if you're coming from a Canon or Nikon camera, is changing your focus points. So if you go here to where it says M, or the focus area flexible spot M, you can click left and right and you can change the option. I'm going to stick with just M for now, flexible spot M for medium. Click on that, and now you can go ahead and navigate with the left and right, up and down D-pad to go ahead and change the focus point. Press the center button to confirm that location for your focus point. And that's it. That's how you go and use, that's how you kind of relate back the focus points from a Canon or Nikon shooter. Let's go back to menu. AF illuminator. My friends from Nikon, you know what this is. It's a little light and beam that helps you focus your photos. Nikon's enjoyed this, Canon, not so much. So Canon folks, you're not sure what this is, you can either turn it off or on. If you have it on auto, if the camera thinks it's too dark, it's gonna use the illumination to light something and help you autofocus. So I'm gonna leave that on auto. Again, AF drive speed and track duration. So to do this, what is this all about? This is for video, not for photos. So here's how it works. Track duration has to do with kind of the speed at which something is going to lock focus on. If you have it on normal, if for example you're focusing on one thing to another, it's going to move a little bit slower between those two, locking focus on it. Now, if I'm in a situation in a room and I'm recording myself like I am right now, I would leave my track duration to normal. Drive speed, I would either play around with both slow and normal to avoid any focus breathing. So normal, this has to do with rack focus, the drive speed, how fast it kind of pushes focus on the subject. So I would set it on fast and high if I was going to be doing sports, if I wanted to track somebody in video if they're doing sports. That's my recommendation for sports and also for individuals. You have to kind of fine tune it, figure out what setting works for you, spend some time. All right, exposure compensation is important for those of you shooting in aperture priority, shutter priority, and even auto ISO. You can go ahead and adjust that there. I'm not going to cover it in too much detail. Some of you know what that is, some of you are not sure. Exposure step, leave it at 0.3 EV. Just leave it there. Just trust me on that. All right, moving on. Page 4. ISO, right here, we have it set to auto. You can go ahead and change this and navigate it. You also have the option for auto ISO, which is really nice. There is this other option called multi-frame noise reduction. I haven't really covered it too much. I don't really know everything about it, so I'm not going to comment too much. Just know that if you accidentally choose that one, weird things happen. So please keep this one and just go from there. Got it? Good. Moving on. Metering mode. You have a multi-option. This is kind of like your center weighted average stuff. You got kind of your center frame, and then you got spot metering. This is all the stuff you remember from Nikon and Canon for those of you jumping from that stuff. All right, next, white balance. You have so many options. You just play around with these. Just press the right button on your camera and you can kind of fine tune these settings. I don't know all this stuff, so I'm not gonna mess with it, but those of you coming from Nikon or Canon will kind of reflect and know what some of these things are, so you'll be good. Dynamic range optimization / auto HDR. Let me explain this as quickly as I can and as best as I can. So if you're shooting JPEGs and you have dynamic range optimization auto on, the camera's going to try and pull highlights and shadows and bring them towards the middle. So it's something you would do if you had a RAW file. If you took a RAW picture, you'd probably bring the highlights down and then push the shadows up a little bit. DRO Auto does that already. If you go to the menu and you press that and you press right, you're going to have access to a variety of levels. So that's going to modify the intensity of which it does that. So I don't know everything about it in detail, but you're going to have to play around with that. HDR Auto is the same thing. It's going to take 3 photos at different exposure value settings, and it will combine them. I could be wrong. Please correct me down below. Either it combines them already for you, or it takes separate pictures and you have to combine them in the program. But I think it combines it for you. All right, creative style. creative style. Oh, by the way, so in many ways, if you're just shooting manual mode and you control everything, you can set it on off if you want. That's fine. Creative style, leave it on standard. Don't mess with that stuff. Picture effect. I don't mess with that stuff, but you can. I'm gonna leave it off. Moving on. Whoa, 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 what's going on? All right, so now we are on page 5. Weird things happen on page 5. And Sony, this is where Sony messed up, and people are gonna get confused. We have zoom and focus magnifier. Let me tell you right now, we're gonna skip zoom for now, but focus magnifier is only activated when you are in manual focusing. So I'm gonna try and get to manual focusing somehow right now. And don't worry about how I got here. I'll show you how to get there later. So I'm in manual focus now, MF, focus magnifier. Now I can punch in and zoom in. I don't want to move my camera too much, but I can punch in by pressing the center button to get in there and zoom my focus. Okay, that's how that works. So good, we got it. We're all happy. All right, so I'm gonna jump back to my function settings. Go back to, let's say, single shot. All right, here we go. Let's not worry about zoom. We're gonna worry about that later. Long exposure noise reduction affects your JPEGs and your shots. I'm gonna leave that off. High ISO noise reduction, I'm gonna leave that off. I'm gonna do that in post-production. Lock on, by the way, you can leave those on and try them out if you want to. It's not, I'm not saying you should, all right? I'm just saying that's what I would do. Lock on AF is a really awesome autofocusing capability on the camera. To get lock on AF, and I'm gonna show this to you, but it's really cool if you turn, so I gotta go back to my menu function, quick functions, go ahead and go to my continuous autofocus, go to menu, lock on AF. If I choose on start with shutter, if I press the shutter button, let me try not to mess this up. If I press the shutter button, you'll notice that it will start doing lock on AF. So what it does is it'll kind of check an object that it sees, and then it'll start to track it as you move the camera. So this is really great if you're doing any types of sports action or photos. And I'm not gonna dive into too much, but it is an area that you wanna take a look at and play around with. I'll have a separate video later in the future talking about lock on AF more, which you can probably find somewhere up there on the card, okay? Just trust me, I'll get something up for you, okay guys? All right, moving on. Smile and face attack, really simple. Here's something really cool. If you have the camera on a tripod and somebody smiles, or let's say, for example, you hold the camera up, if somebody smiles, it'll take a picture, and you can even change the intensity. If I'm shooting video in a setting like this, I turn face detection on so it tracks my face. That's my recommendation there. If you did the registered face option, that works, or just turn face detection off entirely. So play around with that, turn it off, turn it on, given on a scenario that you're using. Soft skin effect, turn it off. Now, if you want your pictures to look nicer, you can change the intensity. And I think some cell phones do this, some smartphones have this feature. Auto object framing, turn that off. I don't want this camera cropping photos for me on its own. Scene selection in movie. So scene selection is an auto type mode. What you do is you turn the mode dial on your camera to SCN, and you're gonna have options now. Press menu, press the center button, and now you have access to all these options. I'm not gonna go through them. You can figure that out. So I'm gonna go back to the letter M on my mode dial for manual control. Press menu. Now I have movie. It's not highlighted, so I'm gonna turn my mode dial to the film strip option. Press menu, and this is the one that really annoys me, and it's really hard to get into in the menus. But if you're coming from Canon, you're used to shooting manual mode, go ahead and press the center button and choose film strip M. You're welcome. Now you have full manual control over your settings in video. You can mess around with the other ones if you want, but I would recommend just leaving it on this one because you have full control over your video settings. Okay, that's my recommendation. Steady shot, off or on depending on your lens. Color space. Gonna back to the letter M for that one to be able to access that. Color space, you have sRGB, Adobe RGB. 90% or so or more of you will just use sRGB. Okay, most of you are going to use sRGB. Only a few of you out there know when you need Adobe RGB. You have an Adobe RGB monitor, and your printing process probably uses Adobe RGB, so use it. But sRGB is going to work for the majority of human beings that have these cameras. All right, moving on. We're on page 7. Somehow we made it. Auto slow shutter. Leave it off. What happens is the camera is going to change the shutter speed on its own based on the given settings in the environment. I don't want that. Audio recording, turn it on. Wind noise reduction, you can turn it on. It doesn't matter, on or off. You choose, test it out. Shooting tipless is really helpful if you want to learn more. Memory recall. I'm not going to dive into this, but you can set your settings. If you can move the mode dial to MR on your camera, you can choose the memory recall options, and you have 3 spots that you can set the settings. I'm gonna have a separate video for that somewhere up here. Okay, moving on. I'm gonna go back to M on my camera. Now we're dealing with some features here. Zebras checks the focus exposure. Is the exposure too hot? Is it too bright? Too dark? So this is really handy. I'm not gonna dive into it too much, but for those of you that know, that's where you find it. All right, manual focus assist. The way manual focus assist works is if you're manually focusing the camera, let's say you're in a manual focus mode, and you try to manually focus on something, it will punch in and zoom in. And it'll make it easier for you to dial in your manual focusing. Now, if you don't want it to punch in, then leave it off. I would say leave it on. Focus magnification time, I would just set it to no limit, so it doesn't do anything weird, like you're trying to focus and then it comes off. Set it to no limit. Grid line, if you want the rule of thirds grid or something like that, it won't show up on my screen, but if you want rule of thirds to show up, use it, it might help you out. Auto review, if I'm shooting sports, I turn it off. If I'm shooting portraits and I need to check my work, I set it to 2 seconds. Display button, monitor. What I do is I turn off graphic display and I leave everything on. And then I go back, display button, go to Finder. I turn on display all info. I leave graphic display off. No check marks on that one. That's what I do. Okay. Moving on. Page 2, peaking level checks. It puts little lines to show where you're in focus, like little markers start showing up. You can adjust the strength of it on here, and also the colors. You have 3 choices. Video people know what I'm talking about. Exposure set guide. Let me show you really quick how that works. Let me turn this off. I'm going to go ahead and change my shutter speed. Notice how the numbers are just changing. Now let me go back, turn on my exposure set guide on. I'm going to go ahead and change my shutter speed. Notice there's a little gray box that's moving left and right. So that can be useful for you if you need it. Those of you that are pros at this, you can just turn it off. Live view display, setting effect on. This is really important. So for example, if I leave my settings effect on, I'm going to get out of auto ISO. I'm going to set my ISO to 100. Now my photo is really dark right now, so I'm going to drop my shutter speed and I'm going to drop my aperture and the photo gets brighter. So if I'm changing my settings, I'm going to see what you see is what you get. This is really important for that situation. So for example, if I set the setting effect to off, it is going to keep a consistently bright image. So let me go ahead and increase my shutter speed. So those of you that know this, if I increase my shutter speed, my picture should get darker. But it's not changing. So what that means is settings effect doesn't change. So you might be saying, why is this useful? Why is this important? Well, if you're shooting in a studio environment and the lighting is, if you're shooting in the studio environment and you underexpose the scene, the area where the model is, and you don't have modeling lights, you're not going to be able to see the photo. So it's going to be completely dark. So if you are shooting portraits in the studio, set the setting effect to off. Got it? And set it to on for everything else. Display continuous AF area. If you're in continuous autofocus and you put like a particular shooting mode or focus mode area, you're going to see these little boxes dancing around the screen. If you don't want to see those little tiny boxes dancing around the screen, turn this off. I would leave it on. Page 3, pre-AF, turn that off. It's just going to keep autofocusing the camera when you don't want it to. Zoom setting. Now finally we got the zoom setting here. Okay, so here's what happens. Zoom setting, the only one that really is important in my opinion is clear image zoom. Go to clear image zoom. That's going to crop into the lens and you're still going to get some really good quality. Now jump back to tab 1.5. So that's tab 1, page 5. Now zoom is activated. Now we're going to go to here and crap, I need to go ahead and adjust my settings really quick so I can illustrate this in a certain way. Go back to zoom. I can rotate the wheel on the back and I can zoom in. I don't know for sure, but I think up to like 1.5, you don't lose any image quality. I could be wrong. You'll have to check it out. I'm so sorry. All right. I didn't get that information for you on this particular tutorial. You'll have to look it up. Hopefully someone down in the section below can answer that for me. All right, we're going to jump back to the gear, the cog, and now we again are back on page 3. You see something grayed out called iStart AF that is only specific for people that have Sony A-mount lenses, and the LAEA3 or 4 adapter, I'm not going to worry about it here. Finder monitor is disabled on my screen right now, but Finder monitor allows you to set it to auto, or you can just set it permanently either to the EVF or the monitor on the back. Release without lens. If you want to adapt lenses onto the camera, you need to enable this. All right, the next one, we're on autofocus with shutter. So this is kind of helpful if you're gonna do some back button focusing. I'm not gonna cover it specifically in this video, but if you want to, you can disable this and use the AEL button on the back for autofocusing and the one in the front to just take the picture. All right, AEL with shutter. I'm not gonna cover this in depth, but auto exposure lock with shutter is kind of handy if you're using something like spot metering. You want the exposure locked on to that specific subject and recompose your shot and not have the scene change, like the exposure change in the scene. So I'm not gonna cover that completely, but hopefully that gives you a general idea. It has to do with locking the current exposure if you're using kind of like an auto mode that adjusts like auto ISO or something. So hopefully, maybe I can give you a visual representation, but that's how that works. If you don't need it, turn it off. You can turn it on or you can leave it on auto. For electronic front curtain shutter, leave it on, and it has something to do with reducing the shutter lag time. Most people will just keep it on. I think there's specific situations if you're using Minolta lenses or lenses with large apertures that you might have to adjust it. Superior auto image extract has something to do with auto modes. I'm not going to worry about that. Exposure compensation set. So for example, if you have a dial that's set to change the exposure compensation, you can either have it change both exposure and flash at the same time. So if you don't want to change the flash exposure compensation, just set it to ambient only. Bracket order, I'm not going to worry about that one. Face registration makes I think you understand what that means. Pick a face, register it. AF micro adjust, for those of you that are Nikon DSLR shooters, you can kind of fine tune your lenses. Never had to do it with Sony. Lens compensation, you can turn these off. If you don't want them making modifications, you can try them and leave them on. You may want to consider trying them on if you want. All right, here we go. Here's kind of the, we are now on tab 2, page 6, the function menu set. This is the most important thing, so check it out. If you press the FN button on the back of your camera, you're gonna see these options show up on the back of the screen. This is kind of your quick function options when you're taking pictures or recording video. Really handy to get access to these. So I went ahead and thought about kind of the settings that I would use, and I'm going to show you what those are. Now when it says upper, that's the top row. If it says lower on page 2, that's the bottom row. So here's what I did. My first one, so the first upper one I have it set to drive mode. The next one I have that set to focus mode. Upper 3, I have that set to focus area. These are the 3 settings I access a lot, so I leave that there. Number 4, I have white balance set for that one. And then number 5, I'm gonna have smile and face detect, because I definitely jump to this setting a lot, especially when I record video. Last, for this one, I'm gonna choose quality, because maybe you wanna jump to RAW, maybe you wanna shoot JPEG. So I do that. So okay, now I'm on page 2. Lower one, on the very bottom left, I'm gonna set this to flash exposure compensation. So I'm gonna look for that, flash compensation. Next, I'm gonna choose exposure compensation for the next one. After that, I'm going to choose metering mode for the third one. The next one, I'm going to leave it on dynamic range optimization, auto HDR if you want to use it. And the last 2 is going to be kind of video related in my opinion, but I'm going to choose zebra, and then shooting mode, I'm going to choose peaking level. My recommendation for you is figure out what setting you're constantly going to in the menu and put them here. That's my recommendation for you. All right, moving on to custom key settings. Here we go, here we go. All right, custom settings. There's an AEL button on the back of the camera. I set that to eye autofocus. Eye autofocus on the a6000 only works in single shot mode or single servo or whatever you want to consider it, AFS mode. All right, next one, I'm gonna put lock on AF for this one right here. This is a setting, I shoot sports, so I wanna use this, okay? Custom button 2, I'm gonna set that to zoom. Set that to zoom. That's the trash can. So if you press the trash can, I'm going to be able to zoom in and use clear image zoom right away. Center button, I'm going to choose focus area. That's going to make it really easy for me to change my focus points, focus area, and whatever I need to do. Left button, drive mode, leave that. Right button, ISO, leave that. And then the down button, you could leave it exposure compensation. I'm going to go ahead and change that to focus mode. Focus mode. That's going to leave the left, the center, and the bottom button to access the focus focus settings that I always go to all the time. So that's how I kind of figured that out. Moving on, dial wheel setup. If you're a Canon shooter, set it to this one. The back wheel is going to turn into aperture. The top wheel on the top is going to be shutter speed. Dial wheel EV comp, go ahead and set that to the wheel on the top right wheel for that one. Movie button, leave it always on. That means whatever mode dial you set it to, it's going to always work. Dial wheel, this is like that little switch on the Canon camera. There's like a switch you can turn on that locks that back wheel. So if you don't want those changing, leave it on lock. I'm not going to worry about tab 3 too much. I'm going to have a separate video kind of covering some of the wireless functionalities of the camera. Application list, I'm not going to worry about that either right now. So playback settings, delete, view mode, index, rotation. Let's just go over rotation. So on this one right here, if you leave it on manual, okay, if you leave it on manual, if you take a picture in portrait mode, it's going to flip it for you vertically, okay? If you set it to off, the photo will not rotate automatically. I really personally think leaving it off makes a lot more sense, because when you take a picture in portrait, the picture's really big on the back of the screen, but it rotates and it gets really tiny. So my recommendations, leave it on off. That's me, try it out. We got slideshow. You can also rotate the pictures and we can enlarge images. I've never used that. The 4K still image works when you connect your camera to a TV. Protect is useful if you want to mark your photos and not make, you want to mark photos in the SD card. And if you bring it into a program like, so if you take pictures and you mark them and then you bring it into, if you bring it into a program like Photo Mechanic, they'll recognize and they'll be tagged. So you can quickly choose your pictures that way. Specify printing, I'm not going to worry about that. Last one, the setup. Monitor, viewfinder, and finer color temps. You're going to have to go ahead and just adjust those on your own. I'm sure you can figure it out. The volume setting has to do with the playback sound when you're playing back a video. Audio signal gets rid of the beep. That's what it's for. Okay? If you don't want to hear that beeping sound, turn it off. Tile menu, if you turn this on, take a look. You get that. I don't like that. So I'll turn that off. Mode dial guide, that's this. If you move the mode dial, you see this. I don't want that, bothers me, I turn it off. Delete confirmation, leave it on cancel. Power saver time, change that based on your given scenario. All right, now we're on page 3, cleaning mode, cleans the sensor. Don't know, never used that. Remote control, if you have a remote that can trigger the camera, go ahead and turn that on. HDMI resolution, leave that auto. Control on HDMI, I don't really use it, so I leave it on, I guess. HDMI info display, I guess if you're connecting this to a display, you can change what shows up on the other screen. USB connection, leave it auto. USB LUN settings, leave it on multi. Language, whatever language you choose. There's your daytime setup and area settings if you need to fix that based on your stuff. Page 5, format, it's really helpful. Always format your camera when you need to. File number, leave it on series. Don't use resets, bad. Select rec folder. You can obviously down here make a folder. So if you shoot, maybe you shoot different portraits in one day and you want to have different files and folders for it, does that. So that's really handy. Folder name, you can go based on date or standard form. I don't know about that one. Display media info, version, setting resets. That's what we did to reset the entire camera. Well, folks, that's all the settings I would change on the Alpha 6000. If you have a recommendation or other settings you think might be worth mentioning to share with other viewers or myself, please leave them down below. And I would really appreciate getting that information going with other users who are just barely getting the Sony Alpha 6000 and they want to learn more about the camera. Did you know that I'm on social media? I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Consider following me on those other channels if you'd like to. That's it. And the last thing I want to say is if you did find this video helpful, consider giving it a like. And if you do want to see more content about Sony mirrorless, and camera equipment, consider subscribing. And with that said, I'm your host, that one camera guy, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.